and welcome to the fourth episode of World War II History and Stories with Ron May. Today's episode is going to focus on the value of the personal testimonies of the veterans' stories that appear in my book. There are, of course, many books on World War II. World War II is one of the most written about parts of American history, and there are many great books that you can read about this war, everything from battle strategy to memoirs to a host of other subtopics. So why another book? And in particular, why mine? The answer is found in the value of each veteran's story. Because each person is unique, so is his or her experience of the war. Every story is a rich opportunity to revisit the history of the most significant war in human history by considering the veteran's unique service story and experience. Now, admittedly, memory is imperfect. The war began over 80 years ago and ended over 75 years ago, so a lot of time has passed since these events took place in the veterans' lives. And certainly each individual veteran's story is but one specific slice of the war. It's not an overview or a summary of all the war like you would find in other books. But what you will find in this book are eyewitness accounts that personalize the war. I was there. Here's what it was like and what I did. It's these stories, personal stories, that I think bring history to life and increase a broader interest in learning about the war from a more 30,000-foot view. Let me illustrate this with the story of Walter Dreyfus and the invasion of Normandy. Walter's story appears in volume 1 of my book series. Dreyfus, who was born in 1923, was originally from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, and then later Nashville, Tennessee, before moving to Indianapolis, where he graduated from high school. After attending Butler University for a short time, he relocated back to Illinois with his parents and then joined the Navy in 1942. Walter became a radio technician and was assigned to the USS Samuel Chase, which was a converted Coast Guard ship that became an assault transport. And Walter then participated in the ship's mission to land troops in Algiers, North Africa, and then Sicily for the beginning of the Italian campaign. The most moving part of Walter's story is when he participates in the Normandy campaign. In November of 1943, Walter was transferred from sea to land and assigned to the staff of Admiral John Wilkes in Plymouth, England. There, he traveled around southern England, installing radio equipment on minesweepers, LVTs, and LSTs. He also installed and maintained the IFF, which is the identification friend or foe equipment on the ships, used as a secondary radar to help identify approaching ships and aircraft. Now, as D-Day approached on June 6, 1944, Dreyfus and the other radio techs were frantically going around from ship to ship, and there were some 5,000 ships used in Operation Overlord. But Walter and others went from ship to change out the radio crystals, which controlled the frequencies, so that the Germans would not be able to intercept the radio communications. And so here's where I think this is a great example of a personal story impacting and giving a greater look into the wider picture of the war. We think of Normandy, we think of all of these ships that are crossing the English Channel. How many of us think of the small radio crystals that fit between two fingers as having a prominent part in the Normandy invasion story? I mean, I never gave it much thought that someone would have to go around to the ships, change out these crystals, and make sure that the Germans would not be able to intercept the radio communications. And Walter was a part of the Normandy invasion, albeit a part that we would never really think of with these radio crystals. But the story goes on from there. On June 19th, 1944, almost 2 weeks after the invasion of D-Day, Dreyfus boarded the USS Rockaway, a seaplane tender, which transported him to Omaha Beach. There, Dreyfus and other naval personnel had the unpleasant task of retrieving dead bodies still laying on the beach and in the water from the amphibious landing that had taken place 2 weeks earlier. In quoting Walter from his story, he said, "We would retrieve the bodies, take the dog tags off, and then put a weight around them, the bodies, in a canvas bag and bury them at sea." I'm trying to imagine what that must have been like for sailors who were not a part of the invasion forces, but were, responsible for getting the invasion forces there. Suddenly, they're up close to the bodies of men that didn't make it past the opening hours of D-Day. They're facing the bodies of soldiers who had been lying dead for almost 2 weeks on the sand or in the water. Imagine a radio man like Walter gathering the tags, the identification dog tags, and then having the unpleasant task of having to weight the bodies in canvas bags and send them to the bottom of the sea. Now that's terrible duty, but it's certainly an important step in honoring those who died in serving, that they would have some proper burial, and in the Navy tradition that would be a sea burial. Now, Walter's story helps personalize and bring home to me the magnitude of sacrifice and how even a radio man on a ship might be called upon to deal up close with the death of others. Now, Walter's story is but one example of the kinds of stories that you'll find in the book series, Our Service, Our Stories. Together, the 3 volumes of that series has 87 stories, which not only help to preserve and pass on the World War II experience to future generations, but to do so in a very personalized way through that personal eyewitness account and experience of each individual. If you happen to be living in the Indianapolis area, there'll be a book buying and signing event this coming Friday, April 29th at 2:30 in the afternoon, located at Hoosier Village in the chapel. Hoosier Village is the address is located there at 5385 Soapberry Drive in Indianapolis. And I'll be pleased to have some veteran and civilian book subjects on hand to greet people and sign books. All 3 of the volumes of my book series, Our Service, Our Stories, will be available for purchase. Thank you for tuning in to today's program. Next week, I will look at the rapidly closing window for interviewing living World War II veterans today. I'll also introduce you to 3 veterans in Volume 3 who died, in most cases, long before I could have the opportunity to interview them, and share how I was still able to write stories about them by examining documents that their families had and piecing the story together, something that many people who are writing World War II stories today are having to do, since the veterans have often passed away beforehand. Thanks for tuning in, and hope to see you next time.